I invite you to take your Bibles, please, and turn to Numbers, the 33rd chapter. This is lesson number 8, but it's covering the last chapters of the book of Numbers, and then we'll be going into the book of Joshua after we complete this lesson, and we'll be ready for that. And there'll be introductory material, and for you, and this stuff will be online as well. All these particular lessons are online. They're on our website. They're on our YouTube channel. These are being recorded all the time. So if there's something that interests you, you can go back and look at the other parts of the book of Numbers that we've studied. This becomes an interesting part to me because it's sometimes easy to overlook when we're looking at 42 different places in which the people encamped over the period of 40 years, which includes the 38 years that we're looking at in Numbers. They start out with this 2 years after they had, when they went into be able to spy out the land of Canaan, and they failed to do that with their faith. And therefore they became wanderers for 38 years. And then we find Aaron dying in this chapter. And to try to put those in the proper places, it's very, very difficult. And you look at a lot of maps, you think you've got it made. Well, this is where this ended. They went here and they came down here, but they may have gone down here twice. And makes sense with the way Numbers 33rd chapter goes about setting these different places. But I wanted to look at them, and in this lesson we're going to do that. As we open up to chapter 33, we just ask the question, who commanded Moses to write down the encampments of the Israelites from their leaving Egypt and their encampment in the plains of Moab, where we're going to find they'll be there on the way to getting into the promised land? Who commanded Moses to write down these places? God did. So if you got a problem with 42 of them, take it up with God. Moses wrote them down, didn't he? And their encampments, notice how he expresses this. Verse 1 says, "These are the journeys of the children of Israel when they went forth out of the land of Egypt by their host under the hand of Moses and Aaron. And Moses wrote their goings out according to their journeys." They wrote their goings out. That means you've encamped. You've come to a place of camp, and now you go out on your journey. You're making your journeys. And there's the encampments that they had. That's what he's recording. That's why we have these here, and some of them we don't have mentioned anyplace else. But he gives a detailed account of the encampments. That becomes the focus. It's just not, well, we're just discovering the place they went through. They encamped in these places. Now you realize that all these particular names and how long they would stay at a certain place, we don't know all the time, but all the abundance of them, and what it took for here, 2 million, they're just counting children and wives and so forth, that a lot of people to move. And therefore we have these things taking place, and Moses recorded those. God wanted it to be known in history of his people. It showed their lack of faith. It shows God's caring about them and providing for them in the wilderness, water to drink, bitter water is going to be taken care of. But they still didn't trust him at a certain time. So therefore we have all of these places. So we'll see very quickly that Moses is indeed the one that is mentioned here that is going to be involved in these particular places. Let me get this other paper here. All right, question number 2. When did the Israelites begin their departure from Egypt? This is found, we can look at Deuteronomy 16:1, but what do we see here? When did they leave? Yes, that's the 15th day. Why is it called the first month? God said this is going to be the beginnings of your years. You're coming out of Egyptian bondage. So we'll find that the journeys by the commandment of Jehovah, there's journeys, and they journey from Ramesses in the first month, on the 15th day of the first month, on the morrow, after the Passover of the children of Israel. So you have that 14th day in which they were to prepare they were to eat the Passover, and they did that on the 14th day. And then he speaks about what happens on the morrow, which is the 15th. So they're leaving, but we know in Exodus 12:42, they left at night. They left at night. It was going to be remembered, the fact that they left at night. After midnight is when the firstborn, the Egyptians realized the firstborn males are being killed, and they're dying. And now we see some of the things that happen here in this next verse of that. But Deuteronomy, the 16th chapter, we'll find in verse 1. I put these passages here because this is the Pentateuch. These are things that come together. Observe the month of Ahab and keep the Passover unto Jehovah the God. For in the month of Ahab, Jehovah thy God brought thee forth out of Egypt by night. So this would be their first month. And Passover's they took that on the 14th, the 15th day, and that became the 15th day was going to be the feast of the Passover. But this night is when they're leaving, and even on the morrow, they're still observing things. So we ask this next question number 3. Why do you think? And just talk because it's Ramesses. Why do you think Ramesses was the first? Why do you think that Ramesses was the first city of encampment mentioned for their departure? We know there's over 600,000 men ready to go, not counting their children. That happened on the first day of that first 15th day of the first month. And so why would be an important place that you would have such a gathering of people to start on their coming out of Egypt? Was it a very important city? It was a storehouse in Exodus, the first chapter, in verse 11. We'll see that. And who helped build that? Make it the city that it is. God's people, Israel. And we find that in Exodus 1 and verse 11, therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh store cities, Pithom and Ramesses. That became a very important city. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied, as we see in Exodus, the first chapter. We'll see in chapter 12 and verse 37 of Exodus, I think is what Exodus 12 and verse 37. The children of Israel journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth, about 600,000 on foot that were men, besides children. That's quite a bit of number to be leaving out from a place. And they'll be taking their cattle, they'll be taking a lot of things with them as they leave that night. Had to leave very quickly. No leaven could leaven. It was unleavened bread. All of those things were done with purpose. They're going to leave very quickly. But that's the first place. That's where they have probably assembled all of their people together and left. But it was a very big city for that time, at least a storehouse city, an important place in which they leave. What 4 facts? I'm behind it. What 4 facts do you learn concerning Israel being free from Egyptian bondage? As we see here in Numbers. Look at verse 3 and verse 4 with me. The journey from Ramesses in the first month, on the 15th day of the first month, on the morrow after the Passover, the children of Israel went out with a what? High hand. What does that mean? High hand. What? Yeah, boldly. And what might that be like boldly? Why would you think they have much boldness when they're leaving? When they left out, did the people of Egypt want them to get out of there? Yes, they did. Verse 35, and the children of Israel did according to the word of Moses, and they asked of the Egyptians jewels because the people said, as we sing in our song, Vacation Bible, get out of here. They want him out. And they're mourning the dead as well. But there was that high hand that were setting forth there. Boldness. They despoiled them. They were victorious. Even at the very outset of taking all the gold, taking gold and silver and the things that they needed, and even stock and so forth. So all those things were talk about that high hand that we're speaking about here. All right, what's the other point that you see here? Another fact. Verse 4. The Egyptians were doing what? You don't read that everywhere else, but you'll read it here in Numbers. Wouldn't that be happening? Egyptians had a lot of value about death. We have the pyramids and so forth. But there was a sense of that firstborn, and they were burying their children. And imagine burying up all over the Egypt, especially Ramesses, where you're leaving. Notice that you'll be seeing that. And we don't see that from other passages. We see it here. That's why we study Numbers and Exodus and Leviticus, because we pick up on these things that realize that was an experience that happened. They're watching them. We just spoiled them. Their children have died. And God is involved in that. Instead of all the Egyptians, while the Egyptians were burying all their firstborn, whom Jehovah has smitten among them. God doesn't shy away from killing babies. Smitten the firstborn. And we talked about that in these earlier chapters of Numbers. Babies are going to have heaven. They were not going to have it. They're going to still be like the idolaters. So from God's perspective, it's not being cruel. It's probably the very best about their identity. The firstborn, they didn't have much here on earth, but they were a soul. They had an identity, and God doesn't overlook them. But that was the punishment. Had God been long-suffering with Pharaoh and his leadership, he said, "Oh, I'll do this, I'll do it," never did that. But that got his attention. That was the one that did that. And that hit home to them. So there was the idea of children. Third thing is that Jehovah has smitten them. And what's the fourth thing that we see here that's taking place? He executed judgments on whom? The gods. Jehovah is a jealous God. He doesn't want any other image about him. And so, well, he's going to get the people out of Egyptian bondage. That's fine. And he did that, and he's going to help Israel. They're not going to be in bondage anymore. That's right. But what was it a message of? Your gods can't keep your firstborn alive? And that was an objective evidence that indeed this is coming from God. How come all of our firstborn world? He wanted Pharaoh to know that, and he wanted all the peoples to know that, and this message of Egyptian bondage and the Israelites going forth from that, it will ring out in Jericho. It will ring out. There'll be a lady, Rahab the harlot, and she's going to be saying, "We fear Jehovah. We've known what you've done. We've known what you've done." God is making himself known. He's not bashful. It's all about his glory. And yes, male babies were born. And if he didn't put the blood over your doorstep, children of Israel, you might lose your firstborn too. And when I see the blood, I will pass over Egyptians. I'll pass over you. We call it the Passover. How much faith did you have in God? And well, what happened on that occasion if they did not do that? Oh no, we don't know. We might have an example of that. But the point is that I see the blood of the Passover lamb is indeed significant. And as we see in Corinthians, who is our Passover today? Jesus Christ. Therefore, put out wickedness from among you. Put out the leaven from among you. Paul is trying to bring that forth. Not that we observe the Passover. We are involved in realizing, but he is that lamb, symbolic of the fact that here was the one that would take away the sins of the world. And so that becomes very important. He's a judgment upon Egypt, a judgment upon the gods. Here's my people leaving Egypt, and the people give them their gold and their silver, a lot of their possessions, and they're on their way as they leave this city of Ramesses. That's what we're looking at now. So any questions about those or comments about those four things? I think it's good to realize God's in battle with these so-called gods too. He wants to make himself known as the one true God. That's why this study is very good as well. All right? Question number 5. After departing from Succoth, how many encampments did the Israelites make before passing through the Red Sea? And we're following this list, Numbers, the 33rd chapter. And when you begin to, if you have to number them, let's look at verse 6 and 7. They journeyed from Succoth and encamped in Etham. So we haven't passed over the Red Sea yet, but west of the Red Sea, Ramesses, and then you come down to Succoth, and then you're going to go further south into Etham, and encamped in Etham, which is on the edge of the wilderness. You cross the sea there. You'll begin to be in the wilderness that they have in Succoth. So there's the journey from Succoth and encamped in Etham, which is on the edge of the wilderness. They haven't gone over that yet. And they journeyed from Etham and turned back. They turned back onto Pahathroth, which is before Baal Zephon, and encamped before Migdal. Now, some of these go together. It looks like there's an idea of at least two. When you have departed from Succoth, you're right there. You could cross the Red Sea. But the question is, why the plurality of encampments? Why don't you just go from there and you go across the Red Sea? That's what we're here for anyway, isn't it? We're escaping. But God had a plan. So I'm suggesting to you, when we get through unlocking all these particular places, and I'm going to spend a lot of time on that, he makes two moves. After departing from Succoth, he does that. So he goes to Etham, and there we'll go on from there that he goes, but he wants them to turn back to Pahathroth. Turn back means I'm going to head back north, and that's where that is. And of course, at that point, it's called Baal Zephon. It's right before Migdal. All those places are there. That's the encampment that they're coming back to. So it's the idea of two encampments after you left departing Succoth that you begin to see that happening. So these particular verses, why was that taking place when we look in Exodus and see that taking place? Look at Exodus 13:21. We can look at other places. But this is kind of putting the history, geography with the history that's taking place among them. But there was a reason for this taking place. Let's start with verse 21. And Jehovah went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them by the way, and by night a pillar of fire to give them light, that they may go by day and night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night departed not from among them. So here, after Succoth, they encamped in Etham at the edge of the wilderness, and that's where we begin to see he led them by night. He led them by day. He had those things about him that were important. So chapter 14 now, as he guides them, he says, speak unto the children of Israel that they turn back and encamp before Pihahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, Red Sea, before Baal Zephon, over against it ye shall encamp by the sea. What's that move about? And Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they're what? They're entangled. Look at them go back. We got them. They're entangled in the land, and the wilderness has shut them in. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart. He shall follow after them, and I will get me honor upon Pharaoh and upon all his host, and the Egyptians shall know that I am Jehovah. And they did so. We got them where we want them. They're entangled in the land. We've got them where we want. I just remember the face of that Russian lady, and over there in Lithuania. She was Russian, not Lithuania, but she was at a fish market. I was in the elevator. I was an elevator a lot in Russia that was stalled. They don't have good elevators. I was between two floors picking up our tracks that we're going to use on the street. And it's just a big fish market, and everybody's there. It's stuck on the middle, and I remember seeing this lady look in the eye of that and say, we caught the rat. She called me a rat. I found out in Russian. We caught him. We got him in a little box. I think about this story all the time. We got him entangled now. We got him where we want him. And I got loose, and the children of Israel got loose as well. That becomes very, very important. But that's why the plurality of encampments. When you think they'll just be moving on. No, they didn't do that. That brought them out. And drones didn't destroy all their airplanes, but 600 chariots got destroyed that day when they finally made the move. And his army, they perished that time. So we see those things happening that occurred. Any thoughts about that move? Moses is recording it, and he's giving us the information of just listing where they were. But we need to kind of remind ourselves there's some events with this, and becomes very important. All right. Question number 6: explain why Elim was a good place for encampment. Why would that be a good place to camp out? How many springs of water do they have? 12 springs of water. And how many palm trees? Well, wouldn't you camp there? That seems pretty good. That sounds like Hawaii, maybe. Better than that. I mean, if you just get one spring on your property, that's a big deal. But here they have this area, have 12 springs. That water coming up, and you got the palm trees to enjoy that. I think we'll encamp there, and that's what they did. And notice how God, directed Moses, but Moses talked about that. That stood out. A lot of these places, nothing stands out important other than the fact they encamped there. And there becomes the point that indeed you had all these palm trees, and they camped there. And then they journeyed from Elim and encamped by the Red Sea. And they journeyed from the Red Sea and encamped in the wilderness of Sin. And they journeyed from the wilderness of Sin and encamped in Dothan. So notice we come back to verse 7. They journeyed from before Hiroth, which is that area where they passed through the midst of the sea unto the wilderness. And they went 3 days' journey in the wilderness of Etham and encamped in Marah. And they journeyed from Marah and came to Elim. So here you have the passing over the Red Sea after they had their encampment in Elim and gone back up north. And therefore now they're passing through. Chronological order. It seems like things are in order. That's why I trust this to see how we journey on, just see where that leads us. And it leads you to places that you never really thought before happened. But, and not saying they did, but it seems like it has that. This is a good place to come to. All right. Question number 7. What 2 encampments did Israel make between Elam and Dophkah? Look at verses 10 and 11. They journeyed from Elam and encamped by the Red Sea. Don't know what town that was, but they encamped there. That's the key. That's what's important. All stand out. They encamped by the Red Sea, and they journeyed from the Red Sea and encamped in the wilderness of Zin. And they journeyed from the wilderness of Zin and encamped in Dophkah. So you got not a town's listed, but it's by the Red Sea. So they're heading south now as they come out of Egypt and Elam and so forth, and they've come through there. And now he speaks about 2 places that we would not know if Moses had done it, but they encamped 2 places that you would not know. You say, well, we're going to get to Dophkah. That's a town. That's a place. But notice it's by the Red Sea and encamped in the wilderness of Sin. Just a general area, but Moses says, we encamped here and we encamped there before we got to Dophkah. We encamped there. And the one right after that is Elash, and they journeyed from Dophkah and camped in Elash. You don't know that's not anywhere else either. So these 42 places are significant. This is where we encamped. We journeyed, we encamped, and we journeyed. We encamped and we journeyed. And those 3 things, Elash, you have a lot of times the map has a little question mark. Don't know exactly where that is. But it follows after they had camped in Dophkah, they came to Elash, and then they come to Rephidim. So there's the 2 encampments, they're coming on down, and you can follow them down. That's not a contradictory thing, but he names them as a wilderness by the Red Sea. The Red Sea is real close by that they've already gone over. All right. Question number 8. How does Moses describe the encampment at Rephidim? How does he describe that? Yeah, the water is kind of poor, isn't it? You don't. Verse 14. And they journeyed from Elash and camped in Rephidim, and were no water for the people to drink. So they didn't have water there. That's what we're beginning to see. So what event comes up to your mind when you see that they have no water there in Rephidim? Yeah, go into Exodus the 17th chapter, and we put an event with the place, and we know what happened here. They were in the wilderness of Zin, chapter 17 and verse 1. This is another book of the Bible, Exodus, how things harmonized by their journeys according to their commandment of Jehovah. And commandment of Jehovah according to their journeys, and encamped at Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. Wherefore the people strove with Moses, and give us water that we may drink. Notice he says, why strive ye with me, Moses says, wherefore do you tempt Jehovah? And we won't read all the account, but they did tempt Jehovah. They did strive at this place of where they were going to get water. And as was already said, how did God provide for them that day? You take the rod, and you used, miraculous works taking place, and you kind of remember the Red Sea opening up, rod. You take that, you take the elders with you, and you're going to strike the rock. Take thy hand and go. Behold, I will stand before thee there upon the rock in Horeb, and thou shalt smite the rock, and there shall come water out of it, that the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders, and what happened? I don't know if they did or not. I think they did, but he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the striving of the children of Israel. Because they tempted Jehovah, saying, is Jehovah among us or not? Then they came to Amalek and fought against him. I assume he got water. And we know from other places they did. That was a wonderful moment where indeed God is indeed with them. And how did they tempt Jehovah? He cannot be tempted with evil. How did they tempt Jehovah? To be consistent with that. He's not enticed by sin. They tempted him, is Jehovah with us or not? Challenging him. God, are you with us? You brought us out here to die? Aren't our children? Are you with me or not? Why would you doubt that? What had they just gone through? They parted the Red Sea. And all that was indeed, and he's going to part the Jordan River down the road here where they will be able to go over. God's been with them from the very beginning. He's leading them out of Egypt. How quickly we forget about the blessings of God when we have a crisis in our life, especially needing water, food. We can't live without it. And our minds just go, that's what they did here. And there's a problem throughout the wilderness. But there's the sense of no water, but what did God do? He provided water for them. And that became very, very important. What happened at Kibroth Hattaavah, giving its name? What happened at that place? Because we see that kind of next on our list. While we're in Numbers, turn over, see Numbers records this one. We just don't have to go back to Exodus. See, we're traveling and we're moving. We haven't had to go out there. This is the first 2 years of coming out of Egypt that we're looking at. But we're getting closer, and we have this event getting closer to the spies being sent out, chapter 13 and 14. But on this occasion, we'll find that indeed quails were being sent. The people wanted flesh to eat. They're upset with Moses for all of that. And so what God has said, he said in verse 19, you shall not eat 1 day or 2 days, nor 5 days, neither 10 days, nor 20 days, but a whole month until it come out of your nostrils, and it be loathsome unto you, because that ye have rejected Jehovah who is among you, and have wept before him, saying, why came we forth out of Egypt? He'll give you a promised land. But that's, God is angry with them. And he was upset. Here, you're testing me, so I'm going to give you so much that it becomes loathsome to you. Does that happen when we eat something a lot that we thought we just craved and all that sort of thing? Thought you liked it? During my young days, if you want your child not to grow up to be a smoker, you just give him a whole pack of Marlboros to smoke and make sure he smoked every one of them. What happened then? Well, I don't know if the boy grew up not a smoker, but for a long time he didn't care about that. He wasn't going to sneak around the back in order to have a cigarette. He wasn't going to do that. You get sick of it. And there's certain candy I've eaten a lot when I was little. I don't like that candy. I can't stand it. And a lot of people will like it. But you have so much of that, and you get sick over that, you realize, well, it wasn't that great after all. But that's what Jehovah did. So it came, notice in verse 33, while the flesh was yet between their teeth, ere it was chewed, the anger of Jehovah was kindled against the people, and Jehovah smote the people with a very great plague. And the name of that place was called Kibroth Hattaavah, because they buried the people that lusted. They buried the people that lusted. From Kibroth Hattaavah, the people journeyed unto Hazeroth, and they abode at Hazeroth. So we're moving on, but these are two events that happen on that occasion. So that's what becomes important. All right, question number 10. Why might some authorities connect Rithmah with Kadesh in the wilderness of Paran? And let me just say, we probably know Kadesh Barnea. You probably know that name. And what's interesting to me is that here in Numbers, it's not even mentioned here in this journey. And yet, it's here. And it's connected with the word rithma. And so, we got a contradiction problem again. That's why we might think of that way. But look at these two passages. In Numbers, the 12th chapter, and this might set the setting of why this might be Kadesh Barnea. Chapter 12 and verse 16 of Numbers. And afterward the people journeyed from Hazeroth and encamped in the wilderness of Paran. So we've got over here Numbers 33, Rathama. We've got Hazeroth. And it's the wilderness of Paran is this wilderness where this is found. Then all of a sudden in chapter 13 and verse 26, we read, and they went and came to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the people of Israel on the wilderness of Paran to Kadesh, and brought back word unto them, and all the congregations showed the fruit of the land, and took him and said, we come to the land whither thou sentest, and surely it floweth with milk and honey. All of a sudden, where are we? What events taking place here and called Kadesh? What events taking place? Sending the 12 spies. It's good land. We can take it. And all of a sudden we see here in chapter 13, they come back with not a good report. So the question is, how come these two places are not the same name? And there's all sorts of discussion in the books about that. But we know the name became more popular of Kadesh, but the wilderness that we're looking at here, the wilderness of Paran, it was first named, as we see, Rithma, and it became known more popular with Kadesh. This, to me, that's an idea that could have happened, but it's the same place. And what happens there, that's where the spies are sent. And you would think, why don't he put Kadesh there? Because this is the earlier name for that. But Kadesh became a very important stopping place, and one where we see the people failed in all of their walking with God. So I'm saying that Rithma is Kadesh Barnea, that we know, and you'll see that on a map. And all of a sudden, next question. So you see here the wilderness, Kadesh up here. As you go from Mount Sinai, you go to Kadesh Barnea. That's where they are, and now they're going to have to make a trip back. They can't go into the land. So that's kind of what the maps will show on those occasions. So what happened there, we've already talked about. But here, look at verses 19 through 35. I know our time is short, but you'll read a lot between verses 19 following. You read a lot of towns or cities that will not be on a map. And in fact, some maps have a list about all these sections that just put them right on another and say they belong over here somewhere between Kadesh Barnea and where they're heading. And where are they heading? In verse 35, and they journeyed from Ezion Gebar and encamped in the wilderness of Zin. The same is Kadesh. So all of a sudden we find them back at he said Gebar when that takes place, and we begin to realize, well, they were there going, but now they're going to come to Gebar, and they're going to go back to Kadesh Barnea. And they journey from Ezion Gebar and camped in the wilderness of Zin, the same as Kadesh. Whoa. He didn't go from Ezion over to Moab. They've come back, and that's why 19 through 35, it's the 38 years of wandering. And he ends up here, and they have to go back to Kadesh Barnea. And what we have there is the event of Aaron. What happens in verse 38? Aaron the priest went up to Mount Hor. That's back up there at Kadesh Barnea. So I've got them coming back to they had been there, and now they come back to Kadesh Barnea, and then they just keep moving north where Aaron dies, Mount Hor, and beginning after this, we find the Canaanite king Arnold Arad, he who dwelt in the south land of Canaan. He heard the coming of the children of Israel. They're up there. So he makes it turn back here. It goes back to Kadesh Barnea. Mount Hor, Aaron dies. How old was Aaron when he died? He was 23 years old. He died in the what year of their journeys? 40th year, 5th month. Got six more months. Fits real well with the narrative. And before they go, the end of the 40 years has taken place. So he's gone. Why did he go? Well, was he not allowed to go in the land of Canaan? Because God told him to speak to the rock, and Moses disobeyed God. And we can say, well, he sure did tell us to strike it before. Yeah. But you better listen when God speaks, because that becomes very important. We'll talk more about that next time. So we're getting ready to leave them as they get ready to go into Moab, and we'll pick it up there. Any comments you'd like to make before it's over, before we close? Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here.